let's talk about, obviously, let's look at the political angle as well. And obviously, for someone that has been in the political landscape for a very, very long time, and Ashraf spoke about geopolitics, and we know that there are many other angles that we can cover. But just looking at purely from a political perspective, and in terms of how politicized these games. I mean, these are supposed to be the Olympic Games, but to a large extent, they have been politicized as well. And also considering we are on the African continent, we know France, this colonial power. I mentioned earlier on in my introduction about what is happening to France in the Sahel region, what Burkina Faso and countries like Mali as well. And the mere fact that these were games that were held in France, and again, looking at the political implications, Nazir.
Shukran so much once again, Brother Inayat. Yes, I agree with you. It's quite ironic that I don't think what has happened at the Olympic was a facade. I think the Olympics shows us exactly the type of world we live in, a world that feels indifferent about the suffering of the poorer countries, nations like not just the Palestinians, but also the African, which France has plundered. So the world there's an insensitivity about the suffering of poorer nations, and I think it was a golden opportunity for South Africa to once again to be the conscience of this world and remind them, look, you should consider banning Israel from participating in these Olympics. I mean, there's precedent for it. South Africa was prohibited from taking part in the Olympics in 1964 and 1968, and in 1970 they were finally expelled from the IOC. So I think South Africa should be the country to set that in motion. The expulsion of the Israeli state from the IOC, to have them no longer participate in the Olympic Games. I think we have missed a golden opportunity, but I also think it shows how the South African government under the ANC has moved from a centrist government to more of a right-wing government, where we are also becoming insensitive towards the suffering of poorer nations and especially the Palestinian people. I think, the fact that South Africa has taken the Israeli state to the ICJ, they should have been the ones to have used this also as a platform to show the displeasure of Israel participating in the Olympic Games. And once again, we've seen the current Minister of Sport actually lambast his deputy minister for being opposed to Israel's participation in the Olympic Games. So I think we've missed number one. It's not really a facade. It shows the state of the world and the indifference towards suffering nations. Number two, it shows how far South Africa has lost its claim to being the moral compass of this world.
Yes, Nazir. In fact, obviously that creates a lot more discussion, but let's just bring David van Wyk into the discussion now. David, obviously you've listened to both what Ashraf and Nazir has been saying, and I just need your take on your assessment because we will unpack a lot as we go further into the discussion. But just your thoughts and your take on what you have been hearing, and also just generally your views on the Olympics.
Well, I think that first and foremost, if we look at the economic base of society in the South African context, October 7 immediately saw a massive increase in the copper price. And so much so that copper mines that were closed for more than 100 years are reopening in South Africa. And copper, of course, is the main ingredient for bullets and shells. Those things are clad in copper, and there's a boom in the copper price at the moment. There's also a boom in the price of lead, of course. And then, of course, South Africa is experiencing a massive increase in the export of coal. And the company Glencore exports mainly to Israel. And Glencore is closely associated with political power interests in South Africa. In fact, in many parts of Africa, they consider themselves king makers. And that is concerning. And then, of course, we don't forget about diamonds and De Beers as well. When we talk about the moral compass of the world, South Africa actually needs to stop all mineral flows to Israel or to any countries that support Israel militarily. Our minerals become blood minerals in the process of going to France, in the process of going to Britain, in the process of going to the United States, and feeding the military-industrial complex. And then we look at the corruption of neoliberalism, because if we look at Biden, his son's involvement in the economics of Ukraine, we look at Pelosi and her husband's involvement in Taiwan economically, and so on. And of course, there's massive economic interest in Israel itself. And of course, the monetary aid that goes to Israel goes straight back into the financing of politics in the United States through IPAC. So what we are seeing is like a circular revolving door of resources from taxpayers in the United States going into Israel, and then coming back in the form of support for candidates in the elections in the United States. And unfortunately, there's no real choice in the United States, because we're talking about the Demopublican system, where people think they've got a choice, but both of those parties will simply continue the genocide and the support of Israel, and basically the ethnic cleansing in Palestine that is taking place at the moment. But at the same time, the West is weakening. This started with things like fees must fall, roads must fall, colonialism must fall. All these movements that came up from the ground up, the student movements in the South African context, but also globally in support of Palestine now. And then, of course, the economic shift away from the West towards the East, and the absolute angst that the West has, because they are losing ground in Africa, where other countries come and they actually invest in infrastructure and so on, rather than in military bases and military occupation. And the fear in Europe, the world is contracting. The settler colonial world is contracting all the time now, and contracting very very rapidly. And I think that contraction is positive. The only problem is that the response of the West, having weapons of mass destruction, and of course the swing towards ultranationalism, can be problematic, because the West can, in its death throes, try to take the world with it.
Yes. Thank you for that, David. And Hassan, just to bring you in, and obviously looking at it purely from a social justice perspective. Now, this is quite interesting, because I've seen a picture of a woman during the installation of this encampment at the Bastille. And yes, she was demanding accommodation for homeless people in Paris. Now, this took place on August the 6th, which is this year. And again, looking at it from a social justice perspective, it is clear that, there are high stakes as far as hosting the Olympics is concerned. But again, the whole issue surrounding social justice, and not only France, where we see high levels of poverty, but again, just looking at it right across the entire world, looking at France, and I spoke at France as a colonizer in Africa. We know the damage that has been done to Africa, and this is the reason why people like Ibrahim Traore has had to take drastic measures as well. And just purely looking at social justice in itself against these games. I mean, I've heard that the closing ceremony, 1,600 euros, and that is what a ticket actually cost to attend the closing ceremony, Hudson.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Inad. I mean, I think we have to talk about sports and the right to recreation, the right to play for poor and working people. I mean, Bertrand Russell in an essay written in 1912, I think, said that the idea that poor people can have leisure seems to be abhorrent, something that the rich and the powerful thought was not necessary because the poor and others should labor for the wealthy. So I think if we want to talk about sport and recreation and the rights for it, we've got to affirm that it's necessary, but we at the same time must condemn the increased corporatization of Olympic sports. It's a big business. It's run by a mafia, and in a way, it's away from the Olympic values. Now, I subscribe to the view, and as an athlete under SECOS in a non-racial sports movement, I used to play football. I used to play many sports. So I want to factor this discussion in at home, that we need to talk about how sports in our societies have declined. It's got nothing to do with the Olympics. It's got a lot to do with how we organize sports around this idea of professionalization. In our local sports clubs, there's no longer sports that we all want to be the champions, play for the Bokke at the top levels. And this right to play in our schools, the right to have swimming pools, all that seem to be denied our people. So having said that as an outset, let me state the obsession with professionalization. It's what the deal was from Mandela's time. This Invictus moment when they got the Springbok kind of colors and they took part in the Olympics 2 years before we received the formal change of democracy in Barcelona, 1992. So sports is a very, very important player in changing the minds and emotions of people. When sports changed, a number of white people began, theoretically at least, to accept the idea of black rule. But I think that we fail ourselves if we simply go wide and not talk about what's wrong with our sports. Sports in our communities and our schools have declined. When as a youngster in a school, male or female, in fact, I lament the fact that we are all male panelists, but it's something we should talk about. When a male or female athlete does well in a school, they take that athlete out to Grays or somewhere. They don't create fountains of these jewels in our areas. They take them out to professionalize. And it seems to be this is the big problem with us here. Now, I know my brother Nazim and others have raised issues about the government. I must say when Peace Mabe, the deputy minister, was attacked, I was pleased that the GCIS issued a press release in her support. And this is interesting because they covered the language that we used. They say in their press release at that time, as was the case with apartheid South Africa, there can be no normal sport in an abnormal society, and the genocidal state of Israel should not be allowed to participate in the Olympics, as its conduct is in direct contradiction of the Olympics' values of excellence, respect, and friendship. So what happens when? So I think we need to contest at that level, but we should not put all our eggs in that basket. We should make sure that sport is available for all, the fat, the not so healthy looking, etc., because it's about us. It's not just about playing for your country. It's playing for your health. And that's where I think we failed. I also just want to make two more points. Jibril Rajoub, the chair of the Olympic Committee, was arrested before the Olympics because he said Israel should be kicked out. And he asked for the double standards to stop, right? That you shouldn't treat Russia this way, where if they break the truce, they broke the truce throughout killing people, as much as killing 100 people the other day, where the world seemed to be very mute on it. Let me just say, so we need to change these structures, but it's going to be a long struggle that requires some compromises and working together across party affiliations. When we did the international cricket boycott in early January in Cape Town, in Newlands, I had to remind them in some media program that the International Cricket Council, this ICC, not the one that's supposed to be charging Netanyahu, was formed in 1909, and this is the name, the Imperial Cricket Conference. It is taking a while for African, Asian teams to populate this. these bodies to change the character of them. Exactly with the ICJ was the same thing. So we will not succeed in kicking out Israel if we do not work on the continent on sport, culture, and economic issues, because that is the only time as a bloc they will listen to us. So sport is important, but it doesn't have to be business sport. It doesn't have to be corporate sport. We all need to take a walk. It's good for our health. And this is something that the ministry has failed. I mean, for the minister to claim victories on something that he has not even contributed, claiming that he'd made Skuman and them, that's nothing to do with him, with Tatiana Smith. He's done nothing there. His work must be on the ground. If he loves so-called colored people or working class people in colored areas, he should show it by delivering quality sports in those areas, for starters, and not stopping there.